This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine, she became Queen Consort in recognition of her own loyal public service.
No one in the room understood why a second crown had been placed so close to the throne. Not the senior royals gathered nearby. Not the palace officials who had spent decades serving the monarchy. And not even the constitutional advisors expected to understand what they were witnessing. King Charles, however, knew why it was there. He stood slowly, looked toward Catherine, and reached for the crown. For several seconds, nobody moved. The room seemed to hold its breath as he crossed the space between them and placed the crown upon her shoulders. It was a gesture that appeared simple, yet carried a message far greater than a ceremony. No announcement had prepared the public for what was happening. No press briefing had explained the meaning behind the private gathering. Outside the palace walls, Britain continued its day, unaware that inside one of its oldest rooms, a decision was supposedly being made that could shape the future of the monarchy. Catherine remained composed as every eye turned toward her. Charles had watched her rise through years of royal duty, public pressure, motherhood, and her battle with cancer. He had seen the public respond to her differently after her illness. He had also seen something that cannot be created by titles alone, trust. And that may have been the reason for the second crown. William remains the legal heir to the throne. George remains next in line after him. Nothing about succession can simply be rewritten by a private gesture. But the monarchy depends on more than law. It depends on public belief, emotional connection, and the ability of its figures to carry the institution into another generation. So why would King Charles choose this moment to place that crown on Catherine? Was it a symbolic recognition of the woman who could become the monarchy's strongest public figure? Was it a message about the future? Or was Charles revealing something more significant about the legacy he wants to leave behind? Today, we are going to examine what this moment could mean for Catherine, William, and the future of the British monarchy. The meaning of a crown has never depended only on the object itself. Within the British monarchy, symbols can carry messages that speeches sometimes cannot. That is why the image of Charles and Catherine at the center of this story has attracted so much attention. If a moment like this were to occur privately, the first question would not simply be why another crown appeared. The deeper question would be what the gesture was intended to communicate about the institution itself. To understand that question, we have to look backward. The death of Queen Elizabeth II created a transition unlike any modern British monarch had experienced. For decades, she had represented continuity, restraint, and familiarity. Charles inherited the throne with the enormous responsibility of establishing his own identity while preserving an institution built around his mother's extraordinary public presence. His accession also arrived alongside difficult circumstances. Charles's cancer diagnosis in 2024 changed the atmosphere surrounding his reign. He continued carrying out public responsibilities while receiving treatment, but his illness inevitably made questions about the future more visible. Catherine faced her own cancer diagnosis that same year and temporarily stepped away from public duties. Two senior members of the royal family were therefore navigating serious personal challenges at almost the same time. That shared experience mattered because it changed how the public saw Catherine. Before her illness, much of the attention surrounding her focused on appearances, fashion, family life, and ceremonial duties. During her recovery, those subjects became secondary. People were watching for signs of her well-being. Her eventual return carried an emotional significance that went beyond a normal royal appearance. Charles would have understood that difference. A monarchy survives through law, but it also survives through connection. The succession rules determine who inherits the throne, yet they do not determine who captures the public imagination. William remains the direct heir, and George follows him in the line of succession. That legal structure is not altered by symbolism. But symbolism can influence how people think about the future. Catherine's position had already become unusually important. She was not simply William's wife. As Princess of Wales, she represented the next generation of the institution. Her public appearances increasingly carried a sense of continuity, particularly when she stood beside William at major national occasions. The question, therefore, was not whether Catherine would become queen one day. Under the established succession, her husband is expected to become king. The more interesting question was whether Charles saw Catherine as someone capable of strengthening the monarchy before that future arrived. That distinction explains why a private gesture could become so powerful. It would not change the constitution. It would not remove William from his position. It would not create a new legal office. Instead, it could communicate confidence. And confidence from a reigning monarch can carry enormous weight. For Charles, the future of the monarchy may depend on more than surviving from one reign to another. It may depend on whether the next generation can preserve public trust while adapting to a changing country. Catherine's experience, resilience, and ability to connect with ordinary people make her an important part of that conversation. That is where the story becomes bigger than a crown. The palace would also have to consider timing. Public recognition is most effective when it appears natural rather than forced. A carefully chosen appearance, responsibility, or ceremonial moment can quietly establish expectations without making a formal constitutional claim. In that sense, the powerful message may be the one that never needs to be officially explained. The public begins to understand who represents the future. The strongest reason Catherine matters to the future of the monarchy is not her title. It is the relationship she has built with the public over many years. She entered royal life as a young woman under intense scrutiny, married William, became a mother, and gradually developed a public role that was distinct from every royal woman who came before her. Her cancer diagnosis changed that relationship again. When she announced her treatment, the reaction was not simply political or ceremonial. Millions of people recognized something familiar in her situation: uncertainty, fear, recovery, and the difficulty of returning to normal life. Her decision to step away from public duties allowed her to focus on her health and her children, but it also created a different kind of public connection. When she returned, the attention surrounding her was noticeably more emotional. People were not only interested in what she wore or where she appeared. They wanted reassurance that she was well. That shift matters because royal popularity can be temporary, while emotional trust can endure. Charles had experienced a similar transformation in public perception after his own diagnosis. His illness forced the monarchy to confront something it had often kept carefully controlled: vulnerability. The image of an institution built around ceremony suddenly included two senior royals dealing with serious health challenges. That experience could have encouraged Charles to think differently about leadership. Leadership inside the monarchy is not the same as political leadership. The king does not govern Britain in the way a prime minister does. The monarchy operates primarily through constitutional tradition, representation, diplomacy, ceremony, and public service. Its influence is therefore largely symbolic. That is precisely why Catherine's public connection matters. A future queen needs to be recognizable without becoming distant. She needs to represent tradition without appearing trapped by it. She must support an ancient institution while speaking to people whose lives are very different from those of previous generations. Catherine has increasingly occupied that space. Her work with children, families, mental health, early development, and other charitable causes has helped create an identity beyond royal ceremony. Her appearances with William have also allowed the public to see a partnership that represents the next stage of the monarchy. Charles's challenge is different. He must prove that his reign can stand on its own while preparing the institution for what comes after him. That means deciding which traditions should remain untouched and which elements need to evolve. A symbolic recognition of Catherine would fit into that larger strategy. It could tell supporters that the monarchy is preparing for continuity. It could reassure people who see Catherine and William as a familiar future team. And it could demonstrate that Charles understands the emotional side of succession, even though the legal order remains unchanged. There is another important factor: Catherine's ability to recover from adversity. Public figures are often judged by how they perform when circumstances are easy. Royal life, however, becomes more revealing when circumstances are difficult. Catherine's withdrawal, treatment, recovery, and return gave the public an opportunity to observe her without the usual layers of ceremony. What they saw was a person dealing with uncertainty. That vulnerability may ultimately become one of her greatest strengths. The monarchy has spent generations presenting stability. Yet stability does not mean pretending that nothing painful happens. Modern audiences often respond more strongly to authenticity than perfection. Catherine's experience gives her a story of resilience that cannot be created by advisors or public relations teams. For Charles, that could make her especially valuable. But there is still a constitutional boundary that cannot be ignored. Whatever symbolic recognition Charles might give Catherine, it cannot rewrite the succession by itself. William remains first in line after his father, and George remains next after William. No private ceremony can simply replace those established rules. That is why the meaning of the alleged crown gesture would be more cultural than constitutional. It would represent Charles's view of where the monarchy is heading. This distinction is crucial because the British monarchy has always depended on symbolism. Crowns, robes, ceremonies, balconies, military appointments, state occasions, and royal residences all communicate messages without necessarily changing the law. A monarch can send a signal without changing a statute. Catherine's importance lies within that symbolic system. If Charles wanted to strengthen the institution before the next reign, publicly emphasizing Catherine's role could be one way of doing it. He could be showing that the monarchy's future is not merely a question of inheritance. It is also a question of relevance. That is the real challenge facing the royal family. The public does not need another explanation of who comes next. The order is already known. What people may question is why the monarchy should matter in the first place. A successful future generation therefore needs to demonstrate usefulness, service, dignity, and connection. Catherine has already spent years building that foundation. Her relationship with William is also central. The future of the monarchy will eventually depend on their ability to work together. Charles's generation represents the transition from the Elizabethan era into a new period. William and Catherine represent what comes afterward. That makes every significant role they receive more meaningful than it might appear. A careful palace would understand this. Major changes would not necessarily be announced with dramatic language. They might appear through responsibilities, appearances, patronages, military roles, diplomatic events, and carefully chosen moments in front of the public. Over time, those individual moments create a larger narrative. Catherine has already been given opportunities to develop that narrative. Her public duties have expanded, her involvement in major national events has continued, and her presence alongside William has become an increasingly familiar part of royal life. Her recovery added another dimension. She returned not as an untouched figure from a ceremonial world, but as someone who had experienced fear and uncertainty in full public view. That experience can make a future royal leader more relatable rather than less authoritative. Charles understands the difference between authority and popularity. Popularity can rise and fall quickly. Authority is built through consistency. Catherine's long-term strength will depend on whether she continues to demonstrate responsibility after the attention surrounding her illness fades. That is why the next stage matters. If Charles's gesture was intended as a message, its true meaning would not be contained in the crown itself. The meaning would emerge through what happened afterward. Would Catherine receive greater responsibilities? Would her public role expand? Would William and Catherine appear more frequently as a unified future leadership team? Would the palace continue emphasizing their connection with the public? Those developments would matter far more than a single dramatic moment. The years ahead will reveal whether that symbolic confidence becomes lasting public trust for the monarchy. Ultimately, Charles's legacy will not be determined by one ceremony. It will be judged by whether he leaves the monarchy stronger, more adaptable, and more connected to the people it represents. Catherine could become a major part of that legacy. The crown, therefore, is only the symbol. The real story is the confidence behind it, the future it represents, and whether the next generation can turn that confidence into lasting public trust. If you believe King Charles's greatest legacy will be his decision to strengthen the monarchy by placing his trust in Catherine, tell us what you think in the comments below. Do you believe she can become one of the strongest and most trusted figures of the modern royal family? Write yes if you believe Catherine represents the future of a monarchy that can remain relevant for generations to come. Like this video, share it with someone who follows royalty, and subscribe for more stories. The next chapter is already unfolding, and Catherine, William, and the monarchy are just beginning together.